Humans may have been in the Americas hundreds of thousands of years earlier than we thought. In the 1960s, scientists believed they'd found the proof, but then the site was sealed, the data buried, and the researchers blacklisted. Yet, decades later, no one has ever disproved the dates. So what really happened at Hueyatlaco, and could this forbidden site rewrite human history? Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Michael. I have a degree in ancient history, and on this channel, we discuss the unexplainable mysteries of our past. Let's get into it. Imagine an archaeological dig so explosive that armed officials reportedly guarded the site, trenches were refilled, and scientific reports mysteriously vanished. This isn't a movie plot, it's the true mystery of Hueyatlaco. During the 1960s, researchers discovered something that hinted at human activity in the Americas far earlier than anyone thought possible. But instead of celebration, the team faced disbelief and suppression. So why is this? Well, because dating tests suggested the site was 250,000 years old, an age that would break the timeline of history as we know it. The story begins in 1959, when a local archaeologist, Juan Armenta Camacho, was exploring the ancient lakebeds of the Valsequillo Basin in Mexico. He uncovered fossilized animal bones, engraved with what appeared to be hunting scenes, deliberate markings, cut while the bone was still fresh. But because the bones were already fossilized, they had to be many thousands of years old, suggesting Ice Age people had lived in central Mexico, far earlier than mainstream theory allowed. This discovery drew international attention, and the bones appeared in several archaeological publications. However, over time, the original specimens were lost or misplaced, a fitting start to what would become one of archaeology's most enduring mysteries. To this day, the whereabouts of these artifacts is unknown, but that initial spark drew scientific attention to the region and set the stage for what came next. By the early 1960s, the area became the center of a joint Mexican-US research project. Cynthia Irwin Williams, a young American archaeologist working closely with Camacho, began systematic excavations at the site called Hueyatlaco. Beneath a layer of volcanic ash, the team uncovered stone tools, lying alongside the fossilized remains of extinct Ice Age animals. Several bones showed distinct cut marks, evidence that the animals had been butchered with stone implements. Irwin Williams described Hueyatlaco as a prehistoric kill site, where Pleistocene hunters had processed their game. However, from the start, dating the site proved treacherous. The bones were fully mineralized, making radiocarbon dating impossible, so the team turned to geological context. Using stratigraphic comparisons, geologist Hal Mulder estimated that the overlying volcanic ash was roughly 22,000 years old, implying that the artifacts beneath it were even older. However, later testing would yield far more ancient and controversial results. But even that initial 22,000 years ago date was explosive. In the 1960s, the reigning orthodoxy was the Clovis first model, that humans had only supposedly reached the Americas around 13,000 years ago. To claim anything older than that risked professional exile. And sure enough, controversy erupted almost immediately. By 1967, a senior Mexican archaeologist, Jose Lorenzo, accused the Hueyatlaco team of fraud, alleging they had salted the site with modern tools to make the finds appear older. Irwin Williams vehemently denied the charge, maintaining that every artifact had been recovered in situ, firmly embedded within undisturbed layers of ancient sediment. Her colleagues likewise attested to the integrity of the stratigraphy, but their defense did little to ease official suspicion. Within a few years, Mexican authorities suspended the excavations entirely, and the Hueyatlaco project fell into limbo. Soon after, Mexican authorities seized Camacho's entire artifact collection, barred him from fieldwork, and dispatched government inspectors to re-excavate the site. According to the team, the crackdown went even further, with armed men arriving at Hueyatlaco, ordering excavations to cease and forcing researchers off the premises. Several workers were detained and pressured to sign statements claiming the fossils and tools had been planted.
Scientific authorities sent some men with pistols to try to scare the workers at the field. And there were about 60 workers. But 3 of them accepted that the fossils were planted. And only these 3 people who signed the paper and saying, yes, we planted, and the scientists planted the fossils.
Now, while these claims remain difficult to verify, the outcome is clear. The excavations were shut down, evidence was seized, and the researchers were forced to abandon the site. What had begun as a promising Ice Age discovery had turned into one of archaeology's most enduring and bitter controversies. So, tensions were high, but the dating puzzle remained. How old was Hueyatlaco? Enter Dr. Virginia Steen McIntyre, an American geologist and an expert on volcanic ash. In 1973, she joined the Hueyatlaco project to determine, once and for all, how old the site really was. Using multiple independent dating techniques, her team returned shocking results. Uranium series dating on bone and associated travertine yielded ages around 180 to 260,000 years. Zircon fission track dating on crystals from the volcanic ash above the artifacts indicated ages between about 260 to 370,000 years, while tetrahydration and mineral weathering analyses likewise supported an age of well over 200,000 years. Every method, applied by different specialists, converged on the same startling conclusion. The Hueyatlaco layers, and thus the tools buried within them, were roughly 250,000 years old. The geologists somberly wrote in their eventual report, "The evidence outlined here consistently indicates that the Hueyatlaco site is about 250,000 years old. We are painfully aware that so great an age poses an archaeological dilemma." In what seems to be an understatement, they noted such a date widens the window of early American prehistory and warrants serious investigation. So, this date, if true, pushes back American history staggeringly far. If people really did live at Hueyatlaco 250,000 years ago, then that would upend the entire timeline of human migration. However, the reaction to these impossible-sounding dates was anything but open-minded. When the extraordinary dates were first presented in the mid-1970s, the reaction from the team's own archaeologist, Cynthia Irwin-Williams, was one of disbelief. She called the announcement irresponsible and refused to accept an age anywhere near 250,000 years, maintaining that the site must be closer to 20,000 years old, though no geological or stratigraphic evidence supported that figure. The disagreement fractured the team. The geologists stood by their physical data, while Irwin-Williams urged caution, suggesting they withhold or soften the results until a more reasonable explanation emerged. The ensuing stalemate kept their reports unpublished for years. The dates, as Steen McIntyre later wrote, were simply too inconvenient for archaeology to accept. However, what happened next has been described as one of the most egregious cases of scientific suppression in archaeology. You know, when I'm researching these videos, I run into the same problems over and over. Information overload, clickbait headlines, and honestly, not even knowing what to trust. It's tough, and as every media outlet is chasing clicks, it's only getting worse. Well, that's exactly why I use today's sponsor, Ground News, a news comparison platform that aggregates thousands of local and international news outlets all in one place. Take this story about a recent ancient Egyptian museum display. I get coverage details. Instantly, I can see how many outlets are covering the story. I can compare headlines. Ground News lets you put headlines from left-leaning, center, and right-leaning sources side by side. And there's the blind spot feature. It shows me which stories are being covered disproportionately, so I don't miss out on what's important. It lets me make up my own mind, which honestly is invaluable when researching history. So if you want to do the same, subscribe today using my link and get 40% off the unlimited access Vantage plan. Just scan this QR code on screen or go to ground.news/button. The link is in my description. Now, back to the video. In the years that followed, Steen McIntyre described encountering extraordinary resistance when trying to publish the Hueyatlaco results. Manuscripts were repeatedly delayed, ignored, or rejected, and an early plan to include the work in a conference volume was, as she later wrote, held up for years and finally lost. She recalled being told by one editor that no mainstream anthropology journal would touch the study because it would force the rewriting of textbooks. Steen McIntyre also alleged that reviewers sought to censor or downplay her discussion of the site's implications. Frustrated, she poured her feelings into a 1981 letter. The problem as I see it is much bigger than Hueyatlaco. It concerns the manipulation of scientific thought through the suppression of enigmatic data. Our work has been rejected by most archaeologists because it contradicts their theory, period. Such thinking makes for self-satisfied archaeologists, but lousy science. And meanwhile, in Mexico, the site itself slipped into obscurity under a veil of authority. Following the initial excavations, Hueyatlaco was essentially closed off. In the 1990s, Steen McIntyre revisited Hueyatlaco, but was dismayed to find that much of Irwin Williams' original documentation had vanished, their whereabouts unknown. Then, in 2004, when new investigators reopened a trench, they discovered that the area had been graded flat, effectively erasing the original excavation, an apparent final act of closure. So today, over half a century later, Hueyatlaco remains an unsolved riddle. Mainstream archaeologists have largely written off the 250,000-year-old date as an error, but crucially, no one has ever disproved the science behind these dates. Every method applied was sound, and all roughly agreed to a date within this range. But not everyone accepted it. Dr. Michael Waters, a respected geoarchaeologist, later re-examined the site himself and proposed a more conservative explanation. He argued that the stratigraphy could have been altered by ancient flooding or erosion, potentially moving younger tools into older deposits. Yet, multiple geologists, including the original team members, disagreed, insisting the layers were intact and undisturbed. But many were still not convinced. Critics also questioned the reliability of the extreme ages, noting that uranium series dating may have overestimated ages due to uranium leaching, while fission track results showed large errors and even reversed stratigraphic order, undermining confidence in their accuracy. Tephrochronological analyses were also criticized for overlooking factors like volcanic glass chemistry and temperature, which could distort hydration-based estimates. However, the 1973 re-excavation specifically ruled out contamination. The layers were intact and undisturbed, unequivocally showing the artifacts were in their original context. And in the years since, additional studies have repeatedly validated this incredibly ancient age. For example, micropaleontologist Sam van Landingham analysed fossil diatoms from the Hueyatlaco sediments and found the same suite of extinct species both above and below the artifact layer, evidence that the deposits formed long before the last ice age, likely hundreds of thousands of years ago. In 2 peer-reviewed papers, he concluded the site could date to as early as 400 to 430,000 years ago. And in 2008, geologist Joseph Liddicoat analysed the magnetic signature of volcanic ash from Hueyatlaco and found it had a normal polarity, meaning it was deposited during the current period, which began about 780,000 years ago. While this provides only a broad constraint, it is fully consistent with other evidence suggesting the site's sediments are several 100,000 years old. Taken together, the diatom biostratigraphy, fission track, uranium series, and paleomagnetic data all point to Hueyatlaco's artifact-bearing strata being genuinely ancient. So what do opponents say to this? Well, a frequent argument is that the stone tools at Hueyatlaco are too advanced in style to have been made by any human ancestor so long ago. Paleoarchaeologists noted the bifacial spear points look like those made by Homo sapiens, not the more primitive tools one might expect from, say, a Homo erectus. And since orthodox theory holds that modern humans didn't exist in the Americas anywhere close to 250,000 years ago, and that no hominin in that era had such tool technology, they conclude Hueyatlaco must be an error. But that argument is circular. It assumes what it's trying to prove, that no advanced humans existed in this region 250,000 years ago. So any tools from that time must be wrong. But Hueyatlaco exposes this bias clearly. Should we dismiss this evidence because it breaks our timeline, or should we perhaps adjust the timeline to fit this evidence? Despite this, most of academia has still chosen to reject the data, for now. Hueyatlaco is seldom mentioned in textbooks except as a curiosity, yet the mystery is far from closed. And not far from Hueyatlaco, another discovery added fuel to the debate. In 2005, archaeologists announced what appeared to be fossilized human footprints preserved in volcanic ash at the nearby site of Chalnenetuf. Preliminary dating of the ash placed it at over 1 million years old, which, if accurate, would make them the oldest human footprints in the Americas by an extraordinary margin. However, other geologists suggested the impressions were not footprints at all, but marks left by modern quarrying tools. This site also remains controversial. Most researchers view the footprints as a misidentification, but maybe not. And on top of this, there are other puzzling sites in the Americas that hint at an earlier human presence. Take the Cerruti Mastodon site in California. In 2017, researchers reported that a mastodon's bones and tusks, dated to around 130,000 years ago, had been deliberately fractured by hominins. The claim, published in Nature, was explosive. If correct, it would push human activity in North America back by more than 100,000 years earlier than anyone believed. The scientific backlash was immediate. Critics argued that nature or modern machinery could have caused the breakage. With no definitive tools found, most archaeologists still call this site unproven, though the damage patterns remain strikingly human-like. But one discovery has left little room for doubt. At White Sands National Park in New Mexico, researchers uncovered ancient human footprints preserved in the mud of a long-dried Ice Age lakebed. In 2021, radiocarbon dating of seeds trapped within the prints placed them between 21 to 23,000 years old, a finding later confirmed by independent dating methods. These prints show men, women, and children walking across the landscape while Ice Age megafauna still roamed, proof that humans were in North America thousands of years earlier than the Clovis culture once thought to mark the first arrival. Today, even the most conservative archaeologists accept that people reached the Americas long before 13,000 years ago. The White Sands footprints make that undeniable. The real question now isn't whether humans were here earlier, it's how much earlier. Was it 25,000 years ago, 50, or could some of the more controversial evidence, like Hueyatlaco or Cerruti, be hinting at a human story that stretches back hundreds of thousands of years? The mystery of Hueyatlaco may never be solved, but in my view, the data reported isn't as impossible as it sounds. If you want to learn more, I highly recommend you check out my friend Incredible History's video, who has done a great job of publicizing this and bringing this discovery to light. I've linked his video in the description. And while the truth may never fully be verified, I'd love to know what you think. Could this be proof of a much earlier human presence in the Americas? Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment, like, or subscribe down below. See you next time.